Peace, family. Welcome back to the channel. In this one, I want to go over the Freedmen's Bureau and the labor contracts that they issued to black people that re-enslaved them. But thousands of African Americans who had left the plantation for cities when freedom came soon found themselves homeless and hungry. Early in 1866, the freedmen began to return to the land for the spring planting. At first, they worked for the promised wages at a rates agreed upon at the start of the year. The Freedmen Bureau required labor contracts to be entered into by blacks and their employers, but did not set wage levels. In a near cashless society, money wages were soon discontinued to be replaced by sharecropping arrangements. The standard contract gave the black laborer a share of the crop according to how much of the expense of production he paid. Only for a brief period did the Freedmen Bureau offer some economic shelter for ex-slaves. The sharecropping system that evolved during Reconstruction soon bound most African Americans into debt so ruinous that they were practically re-enslaved. What is apparent is that white planters were most interested in returning, if not to slavery, then as close to slavery as possible. It is unfortunate and tragic that the Freedmen Bureau chose to go along with this system. They supported year-long agreements with the former slaves, and these agreements essentially nullified the one true bargaining chip enslaved people had. These agreements illuminated why it was so difficult for former slaves to achieve anything close to economic independence. Social equality was, of course, completely off the table. What's also clear is the devastation of freeing 4 million slaves who had no property, were mostly illiterate, had no land, or the concept of the European version of law. Farming was the only skill most of them had. This was a recipe for disaster. Slavery studies tell us that the freedmen wanted to get their wives out of the field and refused to work long days and hard as they did during slavery. Most of the agreements spelled out that planters would provide the land, tools, and animals and seeds. Freedmen would cultivate and gin the crops, perform a wide variety of other tasks. There was no standard labor agreement. Some were brief and sparse, where others went into great detail. Some planters paid the freedmen in cash, but most paid them by giving them a half or a third of the crop. Agreements varied on who would provide clothing, medicine, and food. The restrictions of their behavior what stood out the most, as well as the ability of the planter to unilaterally cancel the agreement for supposed bad behavior. Most added that freedmen were not allowed to either leave the plantation or have visitors without the consent of their employer. What kind of freedom was that? It forced us to really confront the actual freedom that former slaves had. Language in agreements, this is from Shroud, Hicks, and the Drake contract. The language used in these Alabama labor agreements illustrated how far planters went to maintain their absolute power over the workforce. So it says, Fred Sherrod, in addition to providing land, tools, animals, feed, cabins, meat, meals required to the freedmen, commenced work at daylight, worked the entire day except for half an hour for dinner and breakfast. To work 6 days a week, to work at night if necessary. This is D.W. Dix. Added that freedmen would abstain from all impudence, swearing, or indecent or profane languages to or in the presence of our employee or their families. Other planters added that the freedmen had to be respectful, obedient, and submissive at all times. This was a very interesting choice, which was submissive. Kirk and Drake demanded in their contracts that no general conversation be carried out during the work hours, so you couldn't even speak. But this is a part of the agreements. So one of them was they was basically put in the same situation that they was on the plantation where they couldn't do nothing. But when they went into the sharecropping, you could talk to elderly black people right now, and they'll tell you that the sharecropping, that black people couldn't get out of it because they could never produce enough crops to not be in debt. But I'm trying to build a case for reparations in this. No matter if you believe in the ADOS movement or you're Aboriginal, the institution of slavery and what followed after that, that's what we have to study before, during, and after to get a complete understanding of what happened. Even though the people were technically free, the systems that follow re-enslaved our people. So never forget the Freedmen Bureau and a wicked, devilish labor contracts that they had signed our people into. And it's not our fault, but our people at that time were illiterate. They didn't have this type of concept, but they knew what was right and they knew what was wrong. So when they was in this situation, they knew it was wrong. So we got to get justice for our ancestors and for us, because we're still victims and we're still trying to survive what happened to our people. Peace, family.